They didn't say get rid of, they said it's for the best. That's the first lie. The second was my daughter Sarah squeezing my hand and saying, "You'll love the community here, Mom," as she placed my single suitcase on the bed. The bedspread was a color I'd never choose, beige, the color of nothing. I stood there in that sterile room, 78 years old, watching my life shrink to fit inside four walls that smelled like disinfectant and defeat. The window overlooked a parking lot where my son-in-law Mark was already loading my furniture into a U-Haul truck. My rocking chair, the one where I'd nursed Sarah, where I'd held my grandchildren, was being handled like cargo. "This is temporary, right?" I asked, though something cold in my chest already knew the answer. Sarah's smile flickered. "We'll see how you adjust, Mom. If stories like mine, stories of family betrayal and unexpected triumph, speak to you, please subscribe to our channel. You won't want to miss what happens next in my journey." "Now, let me show you around," Sarah chirped, her voice pitched too high like she was talking to a child. She guided me by the elbow. When had I become someone who needed guiding? Down a hallway lined with wheelchairs and walkers. The dining room serves 3 meals a day. You won't have to worry about cooking anymore. I'd been cooking for 60 years. Worry about it? I loved it. "And look, Mom, there's bingo on Tuesdays." She pointed to a bulletin board covered in faded announcements. "Arts and crafts on Thursdays. You'll make so many new friends." I had friends. Had. Past tense, apparently. Mark appeared beside us, his smile stretched thin across his face like plastic wrap. "Helen, we need to discuss a few practical matters." He pulled out a folder thick with papers. "We've taken care of everything. Power of attorney, so you don't have to worry about bills or banking or any of that complicated stuff." My hands trembled as I reached for the documents. "I'd like to read these first." Of course, Mark said, but he was already flipping to the signature pages. "It's all standard. Just makes things easier." Easier for whom? "Where's my checkbook?" I asked. "My credit cards?" Sarah and Mark exchanged a look, quick, but I caught it. "We're handling all that now, Mom. You just focus on settling in." The aide who'd been hovering nearby stepped forward. "Mrs. Morrison, let me show you how the call button works." She demonstrated by pressing a red button beside the bed. "If you need anything at all, just press this and someone will come help you." Help me. Not assist me, not support me. Help me, like I was broken. Can I have a phone in my room?" I asked. Another exchange of glances. "The facility has strict policies about that," the aide said smoothly. "But there's a phone at the front desk you can use any time. Well, during visiting hours." Visiting hours? In my own room? Sarah hugged me goodbye, and I smelled her familiar perfume. The same one I'd given her for Christmas 3 years running because she'd said she loved it. "We'll visit soon, Mom. Once you're all settled." As they walked away, I heard Mark's voice carry back down the hall. "Thank God that's done. Now we can finally move forward with the house." Sat on the edge of my new bed, my hands folded in my lap, and stared at that beige bedspread. Somewhere down the hall, a woman was crying. Somewhere else, a television was playing at full volume. And in room 4B, Helen Morrison was learning what it felt like to disappear. My home was 42 Birch Street. Not just an address, not just a house. It was 42 years of my life pressed into every corner, written into every wall. It was the place where I'd brought Sarah home from the hospital, where I'd taught her to walk by letting her hold onto the coffee table I'd refinished myself. That coffee table was probably in Mark's truck now, heading to some storage unit or donation center. The kitchen was where I'd made birthday cakes for 3 generations, where the linoleum was worn thin in front of the sink from decades of standing there washing dishes, peeling potatoes, preparing Sunday dinners that brought the whole family together. The windowsill above that sink held my African violets, 27 of them, in different stages of bloom. I'd been growing violets for 30 years, propagating them from leaves, nurturing them through seasons of plenty and seasons of struggle. Who was watering them now? Who would know that the purple one in the corner pot was descended from my mother's plant, that it was the last living piece of her I had left. The garden was my sanctuary. I'd planted every flower, every shrub, every tree except for the old oak that had been there when we moved in. Under that oak tree, I'd buried Rusty, our golden retriever, who'd lived for 14 years. Then came Bella, the Cocker Spaniel, who'd been Sarah's companion through her teenage years. And finally Max, the little terrier mix who'd been my constant companion after my husband died. 3 graves, 3 lifetimes of love, marked only by the tulips I planted above each one every spring. The living room held the rocking chair where I'd rocked Sarah to sleep, where I'd held my grandchildren when they were colicky or feverful or just needed their grandmother's arms. The arms of that chair were worn smooth from my hands, and the cushion held the shape of my body. It knew me. It held me. Now it was being sold to strangers who would never understand its history. In the basement, boxes held Christmas decorations I'd been collecting since Sarah was born. Hand-knitted stockings, ornaments made from her school photos, lights I'd untangled every December for 4 decades. Upstairs, my bedroom dresser contained love letters from my late husband, report cards from Sarah's elementary school years, and the hospital bracelet from the day she was born. 42 years of mortgage payments, made every month without fail. 42 years of property taxes, of homeowners insurance, of calling repairmen when the furnace broke or the roof leaked. 42 years of shoveling snow from the driveway, of painting the shutters every few years, of replacing windows and upgrading appliances and making that house not just livable, but loved. I was Helen Morrison, owner of 42 Birch Street, grandmother to Emma and Josh, former secretary at Henderson Insurance, president of the Church Ladies Auxiliary, winner of the County Fair's apple pie contest 3 years running. I was a woman with a credit score, a bank account, and a vote that mattered. Now, I was resident 4B. They'd given me a plastic bracelet with my name and room number. Like a hospital patient, like someone who might wander off and forget who she was. The irony was sharp enough to cut. They were the ones making me forget who I was. They were the ones erasing Helen Morrison and replacing her with a number on a door. In one afternoon, I'd gone from being the woman who owned her own home to being someone who needed permission to use a telephone. From the woman who made decisions to someone whose decisions were made for her. From Helen Morrison to a problem that had been solved, a burden that had been lifted, a complication that had been simplified. And the most devastating part? They genuinely seemed to believe they were doing me a favor. The first thing you learn about living in a place like Sunset Manor is that every day is exactly the same. Breakfast at 7:30, watery scrambled eggs and toast that taste like cardboard. Lunch at noon, soup that comes from a can and sandwiches made with processed meat. Dinner at 5:00, because apparently when you're old, you eat like a child. The dining room buzzed with the sound of walkers scraping against linoleum and the clink of plastic cups. Real glasses were too dangerous, they said. We might hurt ourselves. That's where I met Hilda. She was 83, sharp as a tack, and furious about everything. 23 years I was a high school principal, she told me on my second day, stabbing her plastic spoon into what they called mashed potatoes. I managed budgets, disciplined teenagers, dealt with parents who thought their precious angels could do no wrong. Now I need permission to get a second cup of coffee. Hilda became my interpreter, my guide to the unspoken rules of institutional life. She'd been there 18 months, dumped by a son who lived in California and visited twice a year with a guilty conscience and expensive chocolates. See Margaret over there? Hilda nodded toward a woman staring blankly at her food. Used to be a nurse. Worked emergency rooms for 30 years. Now she can't remember her own name some days, but watch. She still tries to check everyone's pulse when they're not looking. Muscle memory. The days blurred together in a haze of forced activities. Monday was chair exercises, led by a perky 20-something who called us all sweethearts. Tuesday brought bingo, where the prizes were travel-size shampoos and miniature candy bars. Wednesday was memory lane music, which meant listening to songs from the 1940s while half the residents dozed in their wheelchairs. They're not trying to kill us. Hilda observed during one particularly mind-numbing crafts session where we were making tissue paper flowers. They're trying to make us disappear quietly. Death by 1,000 paper cuts of condescension. The smell never left. Industrial disinfectant mixed with the lingering scent of incontinence and overcooked vegetables. It seeped into your clothes, your hair, your skin, until you smelled like the place that was slowly erasing you. The phone call request came on my 4th day. I approached the front desk where Sandra, the day manager, was filing her nails and scrolling through her phone simultaneously. "I'd like to make a phone call," I said. She looked up, mildly annoyed. "To who?" "My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. I want to check on my violets." Sandra's expression suggested I'd asked to contact aliens. "Residents can only receive calls from family members, and family has to initiate contact. That's policy." "But I just want it." "Policy is policy, Mrs. Morrison. If it's important, your family can handle it." My family. The same family that hadn't called once since dropping me off. Everything required permission. Want to go outside? Sign out with the front desk and be back by 4 p.m. Want to change your clothes? Make sure they're on the approved list. Nothing with strings or small buttons that might be confusing. Want to take medication you've been managing yourself for 20 years? Sorry, the nurse has to dispense it now, even if it's just aspirin. I asked for my car keys on day 6. The 8, a different one, they rotated them like prison guards, looked at me with pity. "Oh, honey, your family took care of your car. You don't need to worry about driving anymore." Worry about driving? I'd been driving for 60 years without an accident. I'd driven through blizzards, city traffic, cross-country trips. Now I was apparently too incompetent to handle a Honda Civic. "When did I stop being an adult?" I asked Hilda that night. "The minute you signed that admission paperwork," she replied. "Welcome to being a professional patient. The only prescription they can't fill is for your dignity." The bag arrived on Tuesday of my 2nd week. Sandra called my name during lunch, her voice cutting through the cafeteria chatter. "Mrs. Morrison, you have a delivery." I followed her to the front desk, where a garbage bag, an actual garbage bag, sat on the counter. It was tied with a yellow drawstring and had my name written on a piece of masking tape in Sarah's handwriting. "Your daughter dropped this off," Sandra said, already turning away. "Said she was cleaning out your house and thought you might want some personal items in a garbage bag." I carried it back to my room, my hands shaking not from age but from rage. Inside, I found the winter coat I'd worn for the past 15 years. The navy blue wool one with the torn lining I'd been meaning to fix. Underneath were 2 house dresses I'd relegated to gardening clothes, a broken umbrella, and 3 paperback romance novels with cracked spines. At the bottom of the bag was a note. "Mom, thought you might want these comfort items. We're making good progress on the house. Love, Sarah." Comfort items. She'd sent me garbage and called it comfort. The message was crystal clear. This is what you're worth now. This is what we think you need. Broken things for a broken down woman. I held that coat in my hands and smelled home on it, the scent of my laundry detergent, a faint trace of the perfume I'd worn to church, the memory of better days. But mostly I smelled dismissal. I smelled the assumption that I would never need a good coat again, never be seen by anyone who cared how I looked. That night, I hung the coat in my small closet and made a promise to it and to myself. This wasn't how my story would end. It was Thursday afternoon of my 2nd week, and I was sitting in the common room pretending to read a copy of Good Housekeeping from 2018. The magazine's pages were soft from countless hands, and someone had torn out the crossword puzzle. I wasn't really reading. I was listening to Mrs. Chen tell her daughter on the phone that yes, she was eating well, yes, she was making friends, yes, she was happy. All lies, delivered with the practiced smile of someone who'd learned not to burden her family with the truth. The afternoon sun filtered through windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in months, casting everything in a hazy, institutional light. Somewhere behind me, Mr. Rodriguez was dozing in his wheelchair, his afternoon medication making him drowsy. The television droned on about a weather system moving through the Midwest, but nobody was really watching. That's when the phone rang. Not the gentle chime of someone's cell phone, but the harsh, old-fashioned ring of the landline at the front desk. Sandra looked up from her computer, clearly annoyed at the interruption. She answered with her usual professional boredom. "Sunset Manor, this is Sandra." A pause. Then her voice changed, became puzzled. "Helen?" "Helen Morrison." She looked around the room until her eyes found me. "It's for you." The magazine slipped from my hands. In 2 weeks, that phone had rung dozens of times. For other people. For families checking in, doctors calling with test results, friends who hadn't forgotten. Never for me. "Mrs. Morrison?" Sandra called again, holding the receiver out like it might bite her. I walked to the front desk on legs that felt disconnected from my body. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. Who could possibly be calling me? Sarah hadn't called once since she'd dropped me here. My neighbors didn't have this number. Fear crept up my spine. Was someone calling to tell me my house had burned down? That something terrible had happened? "Hello?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "Is this Helen Margaret Morrison?" The voice was professional, crisp, unfamiliar. "Anna, yes, this is Helen Morrison." "Mrs. Morrison, this is Jennifer Walsh from the State Lottery Commission. You registered a lottery ticket with this phone number for our winner notification service. I'm calling to inform you that the ticket you purchased on September 15th has matched all 6 winning numbers from last night's Powerball drawing." The words hit me like individual stones. Lottery ticket. Winning numbers. September 15th. That was 3 days before Sarah and Mark had brought me here. I'd bought that ticket at Murphy's Corner store, same as I had every week for the past 5 years. $5 from my grocery money, my little rebellion against sensible spending. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" My voice sounded far away, like it was coming from someone else. "Ma'am, you've won the Powerball jackpot. The cash value, after taxes, is approximately $75 million. $75 million. The common room didn't disappear. It didn't fade into a dreamlike haze. Instead, everything became impossibly sharp, impossibly clear. I could see every coffee stain on the carpet, every chip in the paint on the walls, every tired line on Sandra's face as she pretended not to listen. The beige walls that had been closing in on me for 2 weeks suddenly seemed to pulse with possibility. "Mrs. Morrison, are you there?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady now. "Yes, I'm here. We'll need you to come to our offices to verify your identity and begin the claims process. Can you do that?" For the first time since I'd arrived at Sunset Manor, I smiled a real smile. "Yes," I said, "I can definitely do that." I hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, my hand still resting on the receiver. Sandra was staring at me with undisguised curiosity, probably wondering why I looked different than I had 5 minutes ago. Because I was different. 2 weeks ago, I had been Helen Morrison, discarded mother, unwanted burden, problem solved. I had been powerless, voiceless, invisible. I had been someone whose own daughter could dump like garbage and whose son-in-law could steal from without consequence. But now? Now I was something else entirely. I wasn't a discarded mother anymore. I was a secret agent in a beige prison. I was a vault, and inside that vault was a truth that could shatter their neat little world into a million pieces. I was a woman with 75 million reasons to be very, very careful about my next moves. "Everything all right, Mrs. Morrison?" Sandra asked, her voice dripping with false concern. "Everything's fine," I said, walking back toward my room with steady steps. "Everything's just fine." But as I walked down that institutional hallway, past the wheelchairs and the medication carts and the smell of defeat, I was already planning. They thought they had erased Helen Morrison. They had no idea they had just created someone far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The real game was just beginning. That night, I lay in my narrow bed staring at the ceiling tiles and feeling my mind reorganize itself like puzzle pieces clicking into place. The woman who had shuffled to that phone call was gone. In her place was someone I barely recognized, someone with purpose, with power, with a secret so explosive it made my chest tight with anticipation. I wasn't a discarded mother anymore. I was a secret agent in a beige prison. I was a vault, and inside me was a truth that could shatter their comfortable little world of financial convenience and moral compromise. For 2 weeks, I had been Helen Morrison, resident 4B, someone whose phone calls were monitored and whose dignity was dispensed in measured doses by 20-something aides. But now? Now, I was a $75 million problem they didn't even know they had. The power shift was intoxicating. Sarah and Mark thought they had checkmated me, moved me off the board where I couldn't interfere with their plans. They had no idea they had just positioned me perfectly for the most devastating countermove of their lives. But I couldn't let emotion drive this. I had to be smart, surgical, methodical. They had taken everything from me, my home, my independence, my identity, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated me. They saw a confused old woman who needed managing. They didn't see the woman who had balanced household budgets for decades, who had negotiated with contractors and insurance companies, who had raised a child and buried a husband and survived everything life had thrown at her. Their mistake, my advantage. The next morning, I began my reconnaissance. I needed information, allies, and most importantly, a way to communicate with the outside world without Sandra monitoring every conversation. My first target was Maria, the night aide who worked weekends. She was different from the day staff, younger, angrier, less beaten down by the system. I'd heard her talking to Hilda about how her own grandmother had been cheated out of her savings by a nephew who'd convinced her to sign over power of attorney. The families always have excuses, Maria had said bitterly. It's always for their own good, or they can't handle it anymore. But somehow it always ends with the family getting richer and the grandparents getting warehoused. Saturday night, I made my move. I pressed my call button at 11:30 p.m. when Maria would be doing her rounds. "Can't sleep, Mrs. Morrison?" she asked, poking her head into my room. "Maria, can I ask you something off the record?" She stepped inside and closed the door partially. "What's on your mind?" "That power of attorney my family had me sign. Is there any way to challenge something like that?" Maria's expression darkened. "Depends. Did you understand what you were signing? Were you pressured?" "I was told it was temporary, just to make things easier while I adjusted here. I never agreed to them selling my house or taking over all my finances." "That's fraud," Maria said flatly. "Elder abuse happens all the time, and most people don't fight it because they don't know how. How would someone fight it hypothetically?" Maria was quiet for a moment, thinking. "You'd need a lawyer, someone who specializes in elder law, and you'd need to prove you're competent to make your own decisions. Where would someone find a lawyer like that?" She pulled out her phone. "My cousin Luis works for a firm downtown. They handle cases like this all the time. I could get you a number." "I don't have access to a phone." "The library," Maria whispered. "They have computers. Tell them you want to write your memoirs. They eat that stuff up. Old people sharing their stories, very heartwarming." Her voice was bitter. "I can get you the bus schedule. Day pass costs $3. "Thank you," I said simply. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're back in your own house." 3 days later, I told Sandra I had a sudden urge to write my memoirs and needed access to a computer. She looked at me with the patronizing smile reserved for residents who still had delusions of relevance. "That's wonderful, Mrs. Morrison. What a lovely project. The library has a computer you can use." What she didn't know was that I wasn't planning to write about my past. I was planning to write my future. The library computer was ancient, but it worked. I found the law firm Maria had mentioned, Castellanos and Associates, specializing in elder law and financial abuse. I called from the library's phone, using a story I'd rehearsed. I believe I may be the victim of financial elder abuse, I told the receptionist. I need to speak with someone immediately. 2 hours later, I was sitting on a bench in Riverside Park, 3 blocks from the library, when a man in his 40s approached. He was tall, lean, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Morrison? I'm Andrew Castellanos." We chose a bench near the pond, away from foot traffic. I didn't show him a lottery ticket. I couldn't risk carrying it. Instead, I told him about the phone call, about the unclaimed funds that would soon be traced to me. "The Lottery Commission will eventually contact my family when they can't reach me directly," I explained. "I need to establish my legal competency and regain control of my finances before that happens." Andrew's eyes sharpened. This wasn't just another elder abuse case. This was a $75 million chess game. "Tell me about the power of attorney," he said. I described the scene, the rushed signatures, the pressure, the lack of proper explanation. Andrew took notes on a legal pad. "Your family moved fast," he observed. "House already on the market, accounts transferred. They were planning this. Can you help me?" "Mrs. Morrison, what you're describing is textbook financial elder abuse. But proving it and unwinding it while keeping your lottery wins secret? That's going to require some creative legal work." He leaned forward. "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to have you undergo an independent cognitive assessment, prove you're competent to make your own decisions. Then we're going to file to have the power of attorney declared invalid due to undue influence and lack of informed consent. How long will that take?" "If we move fast and your family doesn't fight too hard, 3 to 4 weeks. And my family won't know about the lottery?" Andrew smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was working with someone who understood the game. "Mrs. Morrison, as far as your family knows, you're just a confused old woman who's finally getting some backbone. By the time they realize what's really happening, it'll be too late." The phone call happened on a Tuesday. I had been at Sunset Manor for 3 weeks, and my family's silence had been deafening. Not one visit, not one call to check if I was adjusting, if I needed anything, if I was even still breathing. Their relief at being rid of me was so complete, they hadn't bothered with the pretense of caring. But now I needed them to come to me. I approached Sandra at the front desk during the afternoon shift change, when she was distracted and more likely to accommodate a simple request. "Sandra, I'd like to call my daughter. I found something in that bag of clothes she brought me, and I think she'd want to know about it." Sandra barely looked up from her paperwork. "Sure, Mrs. Morrison. Keep it short." I dialed Sarah's number from memory, the same number she'd had for 15 years. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice distracted. "Hello?" "Hi, Sarah, it's Mom." A pause. I could practically hear her mental calculations. Was this an emergency? A complaint? A guilt trip she'd have to manage? "Oh, hi, Mom. How are you? Settling in?" "I'm fine, dear. Actually, I was going through the things you sent me. That old winter coat? I found something interesting tucked in the pocket, a piece of paper. Just thought you'd want to know." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "What? What kind of paper?" "Oh, just something I'd forgotten about, probably nothing important. But you know how I am about keeping track of things." Another pause. "Mom, what exactly did you find?" I let my voice get a little vague, a little confused, the way they expected me to sound. "I'm not really sure. Maybe when you visit next, you could take a look at it? Help me figure out what it is?" Yes, we'll come by. Soon. This weekend, maybe." For the first time in 3 weeks, my daughter sounded genuinely interested in seeing me. They showed up Saturday afternoon with flowers, grocery store carnations in a plastic vase, and forced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Sarah looked nervous, her hands fluttering as she arranged the flowers on my windowsill. Mark stood by the door like he was planning a quick escape, but his eyes kept darting around my small room, searching. "You look good, Mom," Sarah said, though I knew I looked exactly the same as I had 3 weeks ago. How's your memory been? Any confusion?" "Oh, some days are better than others. I played into their expectations perfectly. But I remember the important things. Mark stepped forward. Helen, about this paper you found, Sarah mentioned. Oh, yes. I brightened, then let my expression falter slightly. Although, now that I think about it, maybe I put it somewhere safe. You know how I am about misplacing things these days. The look that passed between them was electric with panic. Mom, it's important that we see whatever you found, Sarah said, her voice tight. We're handling all your affairs now, remember? We need to make sure there aren't any loose ends. I nodded agreeably. Of course, dear. You've been so good about taking care of everything, the house, the accounts. How is the house, by the way? Another loaded glance between them. It's fine, Mom. We're maintaining it. That's expensive, isn't it? All that maintenance? I let concern creep into my voice. Maybe it would be easier to sell it? I wouldn't mind. I'm happy here. The relief on their faces was almost comical. Mark actually smiled, a real smile, for the first time since arriving. Actually, Mom, we've been thinking the same thing, he said. Real estate market is good right now. Might be smart to sell while prices are high. Whatever you think is best, I said mildly. You're so much better at these things than I am. They stayed for an hour, bringing me little gifts. New slippers, a box of chocolates, a magazine subscription. All purchased with guilt and delivered with calculation. They asked careful questions about my daily routine, my medication, whether I'd talked to anyone about my affairs. When they left, Sarah hugged me extra tight. We love you, Mom. We just want what's best for you. I know, sweetheart, I said, patting her back. I know exactly what you want. Andrew called me that Monday. Maria had slipped me a prepaid cell phone during her weekend shift for emergencies, she'd said with a meaningful look. I have news, Andrew said without preamble. Your house went on the market this morning. Asking price is $675,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $675,000 for the house I'd paid $48,000 for in 1981. The house I'd maintained, improved, and loved for 42 years. There's more, Andrew continued. I had a colleague do some digging. Your savings account was drained 2 weeks ago. The money was transferred to a joint account with your daughter and son-in-law as primary account holders. How much? $43,000, your entire life savings. I closed my eyes and felt the last piece of my old life crumble away. They hadn't just warehoused me, they had systematically stolen everything I owned while I sat in a beige room eating tasteless food and pretending to be grateful. The power of attorney documents are interesting too, Andrew said. Very broad language. Gives them control over literally every aspect of your finances and medical decisions. And here's the kicker. It's irrevocable unless challenged in court. They never intended for this to be temporary. Mrs. Morrison, they threw you away and sold you for parts. This was planned, coordinated, and executed with precision. They're not your family anymore. They're criminals who happen to share your DNA. I sat on my narrow bed holding that phone and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something much more dangerous. Absolute clarity. Andrew, I said quietly, how fast can we move on that cognitive assessment? I can have someone here tomorrow. Do it. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sickly. I sat beside Andrew at the plaintiff's table, wearing the best outfit I could assemble from my meager Sunset Manor wardrobe. A navy blue dress that hung loose after 3 weeks of institutional food, and the pearls I'd managed to keep hidden in my pillowcase. Across the aisle, Sarah and Mark sat with their lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who kept checking his phone. Sarah wouldn't meet my eyes. She'd aged years in the 2 weeks since our last visit, her face drawn with stress and sleepless nights. Mark's confident swagger was gone, replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man who knew his world was about to collapse. Your Honor, Andrew began, his voice calm and measured, We're here today because Mrs. Helen Morrison was the victim of a carefully orchestrated scheme to defraud her of her life savings, her home, and her fundamental right to self-determination. He laid out the facts like breadcrumbs, leading to an inevitable conclusion: the rushed power of attorney signing with no independent legal counsel present, the immediate transfer of financial assets, the house listing that appeared within days of my institutionalization, the cognitive assessment I'd taken the previous week, administered by Dr. Rebecca Chen, which showed me to be of perfectly sound mind. Mrs. Morrison scored in the 95th percentile for cognitive function in her age group, Andrew continued, placing the report on the judge's desk. She demonstrates clear understanding of complex financial concepts, excellent memory recall, and sophisticated reasoning abilities. There is absolutely no medical justification for the sweeping power of attorney her family convinced her to sign. Sarah's lawyer stood up, his voice oozing the kind of false concern that had become sickeningly familiar. Your Honor, Mrs. Morrison's family was acting out of genuine concern for her welfare, living alone at 78, managing a large property, handling complex financial decisions. These are legitimate safety concerns. Safety concerns that coincidentally resulted in the family gaining control of nearly $750,000 in assets. Andrew's voice carried just the right note of incredulity. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. Mr. Peterson, I've reviewed the timeline here. Mrs. Morrison was moved to residential care and her house was listed for sale within a span of 4 days. That's remarkably efficient for a family supposedly acting out of concern rather than financial interest. I watched Sarah's face crumble as the judge spoke. This wasn't going the way they'd expected. Sarah's lawyer tried to recover, but his arguments fell apart under scrutiny. Your Honor, Mrs. Morrison had been showing signs of confusion, forgetfulness. What signs? The judge interrupted. I see no medical documentation of cognitive decline, no physician's evaluation, no family doctor's concerns noted in any medical records. Well, she was having trouble managing her bills, her household. Andrew stood smoothly. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Mrs. Morrison's bank records for the 6 months prior to her institutionalization. Every bill paid on time, every transaction clearly documented, no evidence whatsoever of financial mismanagement. The lawyer's face reddened. She was isolated, had few social contacts. She was actively involved in her church, had regular contact with neighbors, and was volunteering at the local food bank twice a week, Andrew countered, producing witness statements. Mrs. Patterson, her next-door neighbor of 20 years, describes her as sharp as ever and was shocked to learn she'd been moved to residential care. I watched Mark's face throughout this exchange. Unlike Sarah, who looked devastated, he looked angry. The entitled rage of someone who'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar and couldn't believe he was being called out for it. Your Honor, Sarah's lawyer made one last desperate attempt. Even if there were irregularities in the process, Mrs. Morrison is now settled in excellent care. Moving her again could be disruptive. Mr. Peterson, the judge said coldly, are you seriously arguing that fraud is acceptable as long as the victim is comfortable afterward? The courtroom fell silent. Mrs. Morrison, the judge said, turning to me directly, I'd like to hear from you. Did you understand what you were signing when you agreed to the power of attorney? I stood carefully, feeling the weight of this moment. Everything, my freedom, my dignity, my future, hinged on what I said next. Your Honor, I wasn't asked to sign, I was told to sign. There's a difference. The simple truth of that statement seemed to echo in the small courtroom. My daughter told me it was temporary just to make things easier while I adjusted to my new living situation. She said it would help them handle my bills while I settled in. I was never told they planned to sell my house immediately. I was never told they would take control of my life savings. I was never told this would be permanent. I looked directly at Sarah, who was crying now. I trusted them because they were my family. I signed because I believed they had my best interests at heart. But their interests and mine were never the same thing. The judge nodded slowly. Mrs. Morrison, do you feel you were deceived about the scope and permanence of this arrangement? Your Honor, I've spent the last month learning the difference between being cared for and being managed. My family didn't want to care for me. They wanted to manage me like an asset that had become inconvenient. I sat back down, my heart pounding. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like Helen Morrison again. Not a victim, not a burden, but a woman who still had a voice worth hearing. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. The power of attorney was declared invalid due to undue influence and lack of informed consent. My financial accounts were to be restored to my sole control within 48 hours. The house sale was immediately halted pending my decision on how to proceed. I didn't gloat. I didn't make speeches. When Sarah approached me outside the courtroom, tears streaming down her face, I simply said, "I hope you understand now why I had to do this." "Mom, I'm sorry. We thought—" "You thought wrong." I turned away before she could see my own tears starting. Back at Sunset Manor, I arranged my discharge with the same quiet efficiency I'd once used to run my household. No dramatic announcements, no farewell speeches in the common room. I packed my belongings, the few things that had followed me into this place, into the same single suitcase I'd arrived with. The only person I said goodbye to was Hilda. I pressed Andrew's business card into her hand. "In case you ever need it," I whispered. "Where will you go?" she asked. "Home," I said simply, though I wasn't sure yet what that meant. Maria was working the day shift as a favor just to see me off. "You did it," she said, squeezing my hand. "You actually did it." "We did it," I corrected. "Thank you for believing I was worth saving." I didn't go back to 42 Birch Street. That house, for all its memories, represented the woman I used to be, the woman who could be manipulated, controlled, discarded. I needed a place that belonged to the woman I'd become. Andrew helped me find it, a small cottage on Lake Minnetonka about an hour outside the city. It had been on the market for months because it needed work, new floors, updated plumbing, a kitchen that hadn't been touched since the 1970s. To most buyers, it was a project. To me, it was possibility. The day I got the keys, I drove there alone in the Honda Civic I'd retrieved from Sarah and Mark's garage, my car, which they'd planned to sell along with everything else. The cottage sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees, their October leaves turning gold and red. A small dock extended into the lake, and I could see clear to the bottom of the water. The key was cold and heavy in my hand. I turned the lock myself, heard the satisfying click of tumblers falling into place, and stepped into my new life. The cottage was empty except for dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight. The hardwood floors creaked under my feet, and the windows needed washing, but it was mine. Every creaky board, every stain on the wall, every decision about paint colors and furniture, all mine to make. For the first time in months, I was home. The first thing I did was make a cup of tea. Not because it was tea time, not because it was part of a scheduled routine, but because I wanted tea and I could make it myself. I used tap water from my own kitchen sink, heated it on my own stove, and drank it from a paper cup, because I hadn't bought dishes yet. I sat on the floor of my empty living room and watched the sun set over the lake through windows that belonged to me. The silence wasn't the oppressive silence of neglect I'd known at Sunset Manor. This was the rich, full silence of peace. The silence of a woman who had reclaimed her life and was finally free to live it. I opened a new notebook I'd bought on the way to the cottage, uncapped a pen, and wrote my first entry, October 15th. Today I came home. Below that, I wrote, tomorrow, I start building the life they tried to steal from me. Outside, the lake lapped gently against my dock, and Helen Morrison, all 78 years of her, smiled and began to plan her future. If you are watching this, if you feel you have been put on a shelf, if your family treats your life like an inconvenience to be managed, hear me. I know what it's like to watch your own children look at you and see a burden instead of a person. I know what it feels like when the people who are supposed to love you most start making decisions about your life without asking what you want. I know the special kind of heartbreak that comes when you realize your family sees you as a problem to be solved rather than a human being to be cherished. Maybe you're sitting in your own beige room right now, wondering if this is just how it ends. Maybe you've been told it's for your own good so many times you've started to believe it. Maybe you've begun to think that being warehoused and managed is the best you can hope for. I'm here to tell you that's a lie. Your story isn't over. Your voice still matters. You still have choices, even when everyone around you is trying to convince you that you don't. You are not a burden. You are a story that isn't finished being written. Your voice matters. Your choices matter. Your life has value that can't be measured in convenience or cost-effectiveness. You do not have to win the lottery to reclaim your name. You just have to remember that you still have one. You have rights that can't be signed away by people who claim to know what's best for you. You have worth that doesn't diminish with age or circumstance. They thought they could dump me and forget me, but they forgot one thing. I was the one who taught them how to stand, and I'm not done standing yet. The cottage by the lake became more than my home. It became my headquarters. With Andrew's help, I established a foundation for elder rights advocacy. Every month, I get calls from people like Hilda, like the woman I used to be, people who need someone to remind them that they're still worth fighting for. Sarah calls sometimes. We're working on rebuilding what was broken, but it's slow going. Trust, once shattered, doesn't heal easily. Mark and I don't speak at all. Some betrayals cut too deep for forgiveness. But this story isn't about them anymore. It's about what happens when you refuse to disappear quietly, when you remember that your signature on a piece of paper doesn't erase your right to exist as a full human being. If stories of reclaiming her power and dignity moves you, please subscribe to our channel. We share stories of triumph over family betrayal, late in life comebacks, and the strength that comes with age and experience. Your subscription helps us bring more of these powerful stories to light. Stories of people who refuse to accept that their lives were over just because someone else decided they were inconvenient. Remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself. It's never too late to remember your own name. And it's never too late to come home to the life you deserve.